There are very few places in the world where you can get the opportunity to see over £10 billion worth of private boats and yachts gathered together solely for a peacetime mission. But this short stretch of the Mediterranean Sea is one of them. Slowly swinging to anchor in unison as the tide gently turns this flotilla, almost as if in common unspoken agreement, it is an extraordinary spectacle. One can only marvel at the beauty of the shipping and indeed the collected affluence as the peacocks of the sea show their plumage for the many envious spectators who gather and observe from the shoreline and vantage points of this truly great city. There are very few places in the world where you can get the opportunity to see over £50 million worth of private cars, gathered solely for yet another display of all year round plumage. But this short stretch of road outside the world's most famous casino is one of them. However, this is not an enormous private compound or secured complex of high walls, highly guarded personal property and collection of only the immensely rich and famous. This is one of the most relaxed, peaceful, inviting, clean, secure and polite locations in an increasingly populated and intolerant world, offering every traveller a multi-language welcome even if you arrive on foot or a bicycle. Welcome to the biggest city of the second smallest country in the world. This is Monte Carlo. The Principality of Monaco, no larger than a small village in its own right, is in fact divided into several distinctive tiny towns, Monte Carlo being the best known. Hanging determinedly onto the maritime Alps, it seems that just the slightest loosening of grip would have the entire country slide quietly into the warm, welcoming waters of the northern Mediterranean. Bordered on all three land sides by France, it's only a short distance until you enter Italy to the east. It's fair to say that although unique in its own right, influences of French and Italian culture, architecture, cuisine and je ne sais quoi can constantly be seen all over Monte Carlo. So how far back in time do these influences begin? For most people, these days, the two simple words Monte Carlo conjure up an immediate picture of the exotic casino, the world-renowned and legendary centre of significant gambling. But as I study the history of this tiny country, it seems to me that the gambles of survival and creation go back as far as primitive man. The earliest traces of occupation for this region were found in a cave in the St. Martin Gardens and date back to around 600 BC. The Ligures, described as hard-working and exemplary examples of frugal mountain folks, probably used the natural harbour and protection for access to the sea for fish, trade and commerce. There appears to be some debate about the origin of the name Monaco. Some historians say it comes from the Ligurian tribe, the Monoikas. Others say it comes from the Greek language, whereas the next faction along the academic highway refer to the current Port of Hercules as reference to the Roman occupation and their hero Heraclius. The Romans occupied this province of the Alps for several hundred years, during which time the prosperity of the area grew significantly as many families put down roots in such a friendly climate, and trade developed well with travellers and shipping from distant Phoenician and Carthaginian ports. However, after the fall of the Roman Empire and the disappearance of reliable military garrisons, Monaco was regularly sacked by various barbaric invaders, and it took until the end of the 12th century at least, and the defeat of the Saracens, for the area to become quietly and confidently repopulated to a functioning degree. Then the wheel of fortune began to turn again for the region, and in the 13th century, after some arguing, debating, challenging, and plumage waving between the parties representing the partisans of the emperor and the Guelphs, the dedicated followers of the Pope, the Guelphs and their close allies, the Grimaldis, find themselves expelled from Genoa, and they immediately take refuge with their armies in the province. On the 8th of January 1297, a real-life piece of fancy dress takes place, with Francois Grimaldi slipping quietly into the Monaco stronghold dressed as a Franciscan monk, along with enough soldiers, and the castle was seized. The rest is history, as they say. Apart from a bit of a glitch when the Grimaldis lost control of the rock in 1331, and the guillotining of the wife of Joseph Grimaldi in 1794 during the French Revolution, on the whole, they've had a firm hand on the guide ropes. Indeed, over the 700-year period since 1297, there's been plenty of tug-of-war competitions for the right to occupy, administer, and ultimately control the safety, commercial implications, and the future of this tiny country, which, in order to finally confirm its independent status, handed over about 80% of its local territory to the French in 1861. It seems to have been a good call. The French, by an amazing coincidence, decided to begin work on a coastal road joining Nice to Monaco, created a railway stop on the newly laid track from Nice to Genoa. Monaco was becoming accessible to all, not just sailors and saddle-sore mule riders. Needing new revenue for Monaco, Charles III, inspired by the arrival of the railway line, founded a casino, renamed Charles Hill as Monte Carlo, and opened the doors to the first wealthy gamblers and tourists from all of Europe. His next stroke of a fountain pen signed a new law exempting residents from most taxes, ensuring a stream of enthusiastic newcomers with trainloads of cash and an overwhelming urge to build a house coincidentally within meters of this new city. Hedonism became the order of the day as the rich and famous, even the richly famous, began to gather here for their annual displays of plumage. Fine wines, the best of cuisine, new hotels and restaurants, dining, shining and wining became internationally recognized as best processed in the world's first state, apparently dedicated to endorphins. Indeed, apart from merely risking your family wealth at the gaming tables, Monte Carlo became somewhat scandalized in Victorian society with what were called acts of gallantry, which in real terms meant skinny dipping. Nowadays, such public displays are somewhat frowned upon, and you would soon incur the attention of an extremely well-dressed and presented Monte Carlo policeman if you acted with gallantry in the 21st century. The native Monegasque population are a more conservative bunch and are rarely seen in the areas of affluence that Monaco constantly promotes on a global stage. They are devoted to their ruling family, live quieter lives, and, I understand, are not allowed to even enter the casinos unless they work there. Taxation policies may give them a cheaper lifestyle in the world's most expensive place to buy a beer, but they are by nature and local agreement encouraged not to squander their advantages. Monte Carlo provides homes for the rich and famous, offers an open invitation to the world to share its assets and amenities, and all in an atmosphere of cleanliness and significantly low crime rate. So, with suitably attired footwear and not a swimsuit in sight, let's begin our exploration and discovery at the top of the hill with the Prince's Palace, the Palais Princier. The earliest fortress on this site was built by the Ghibellines in the late 12th century. However, it's likely there was a lookout point and probably some form of simple defence or stockade here long before, as this rock is on the most pointed bit of the south-facing coastline. But of course, in 1297, a bold Francois became a Franciscan for a night and seized the simple fortress and its strategically important port. Expansion over time led to the acquisition of Roquebrune, Cap Martin and Menton areas, but this palace was built to be a stronghold for the Grimaldi feudal lords, who remained thus titled until becoming sovereign princes in a calmer 17th century. The Prince's Palace of Monaco is somewhat unique amongst royal residences because at the time when European sovereigns were building luxurious and costly palaces of Renaissance and Baroque design, wherever they chose, the Monegasques were constantly aware of their fragile rule over the area, and as a consequence, the defensive capabilities of the buildings were significant and carefully contained to the one area. As a result, the palace takes full advantage of the geomorphology of the rocks, and lavish exterior areas are not to be found, with the exception of the modern-built frontage where the viewing public can gather to see the changing of the guard and other public ceremonies. With much of the palace having been rebuilt in comparatively modern times, including the towers, you can best see the original medieval fortifications at the rear of the palace, and indeed a visit to the Jardin Exotique, where we are ourselves venturing later in this programme, allows you to see a far better view of all the historic aspects of this unusual palace. This picture, dating from the 1890s, enables us to get a better view and understanding of the layout, before the foliage of Provence advanced enough to create the soft green curtain that engulfs the point today, along with many man-made obstacles that obstruct the classic view. During the middle 14th century, the son of Francois' cousin took on the responsibility of enlarging the fortress with two buildings, one overlooking the sea and the other on the eastern side. These buildings appear to have made the palace look more like a palace, but the fortification aspects were never forgotten, as over the next few decades the Grimaldis constantly lost and then regained their stronghold during ongoing tussles with the determined Genoese upstarts. But with the eventual taking of Menton and Roquebrune, the Grimaldis finally had an albeit vulnerable but larger territory to govern, and all power emanated from the Palais at Monte Carlo. There are in fact several Chateau Grimaldi along the French Riviera, historically illustrating the spread of the family wings as their power and bank balances increased. Over the next 10 decades, the Grimaldis withstood all assaults on their precious epicenter and constantly restored the bombarding attacks from not only Italian forces, but also French, Spanish, and even German. With time passing at its usual rate of speed, slowly the Grimaldi family made small alliances with France over matters of trade and cooperation, and combining that with the desire to have an albeit fortified palace that reflected their status quo in terms of prestige and power, they gradually extended until the accommodation could handle a garrison of over 400 soldiers. Apart from the military requirements, the governing of people, diplomacy and socialising began to be taken into account, and subsequent rulers throughout the 16th century and onwards built the staterooms, including the hall and luxury accommodation for residents that included balconies and the inevitable surroundings of an established family with regional wealth. Honor I did a good job of compromise during his reign until his death in 1581, by building several of the galleries, including the Hercules, the new courtyard, and further arcades. But ever mindful of the silk-thin stability of the French treaties, he commissioned All Saints Tower and the Serravalle Bastion. The semicircular tower guarded the mainland link, while at the same time underground passages met the new bastion, which was basically a 3-story gun tower. Underneath the new courtyard, a cistern was created, capable of storing enough fresh water to sustain a 1,000-strong garrison for up to 20 months if required, and all areas could now be reached without sticking a single head over a parapet wall. All these efforts failed to stop, surprisingly, the Spanish from occupying the Grimaldi special home with a garrison in 1605. Albeit that about 30 years later, the Spanish king finally referred to Honor II as Serene Prince, immediately creating an official principality for Monaco, even though Spanish troops had their feet up on the Grimaldi kitchen furniture at the time. Enough became enough, and in 1641, with the full cooperation of new, high-powered French friends and allies, Honor booted the Spanish out and declared the liberty of Monaco. A bold statement, much dependent on a French cooperation that lasted for about 160 years, making Honor II a well-regarded hero of Monaco. However, with his descendants largely absent over the following decades, and mostly interested in playing court at Fontainebleau, it took the French Revolution to upset the proverbial apple cart, with the Monegasques enthused by the anti-aristocracy movement, resulting in the looting of the palace and the remaining collection of assets and arts being auctioned away by the French government. Monaco was renamed Fort de Hercule and turned into a military hospital and poorhouse. It seemed as if all was lost and a unique principality and palais consumed by the new powers of the French government. But the Treaty of Paris in 1814 coupled with the fortuitous marriage of Honor IV to a French woman of status, paved the way for the steady restoration of the seriously under-maintained palace. The old bathing pavilion was demolished, and the buildings that we see today were gradually added and extended. As previously mentioned, signing away the closer regions to French rule enabled the foundations of modern Monte Carlo as we know it today to be laid, and the palace is probably the most visited building complex in Monaco. The only threat to its solid state walls would be an outraged firework from an over-enthusiastic yacht. But despite this calm and confident atmosphere, the Guard changes daily as it has done for so many years, creating a spectacle of authority and defence admired by millions of visitors every year. Just a little further from the palace than the average tourist can throw a stone is a rather special building worthy of visiting, especially if you want a little peace and calm after exploring the palace, the local shops and cafes. The Cathedral of Monaco, although only built in the 1870s, has become a shrine in its own right, as it not only houses the tombs of the former princes, but is the final resting place of Princess Grace, who tragically died in a car accident in 1982. The former Hollywood movie star known as Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier in 1956 at the age of 27. She boldly stepped off the red carpet of Tinseltown and onto the royal walkway of the palace, becoming an international royal sensation and ambassador for Monte Carlo almost overnight. A forerunner in the newly discovered world of celebrity royalty, there is a certain irony in the attendance of Princess Diana at Grace's funeral. To add poignancy further, it is publicly noted that one of Grace's best pieces of advice to the then Lady Diana Spencer was, "Don't worry, dear, you see, it'll only get worse." Built from white stone, like much of Monte Carlo's primary buildings, the cathedral is a fine example of a modern place of worship along traditional lines. Sited on the same spot as a 13th century chapel dedicated to St. Nicholas, this Catholic cathedral carries the same name as the revered saint. After letting your eyes adjust to the dark, the first altar you find on the right displays an unusual artifact. The remnant of a bone historically considered to be a skeletal part of the patron saint of Monaco and Corsica, Saint Devota. Dating from her death circa 303 AD, legend tells the tale of her unjust treatment as a committed Christian, and her barbaric death at the age of only 20, her remains repossessed by the priest and his deacon, and washed up in a shipwreck and subsequently interned at Monaco on the Ligurian coast. Early reports of miracles related to the tomb resulted in her movement to a nearby monastery for protection, but in due course she was returned to Monaco and was considered of heavenly importance and influence at the previously mentioned coup over the Spanish in 1641. Now this last relic is gazed on by many thousands of Christians every year, a surprise diversion when they've come to visit the shrine of Princess Grace. Moving along, we come to the extremely popular dedication to St. Nicholas, protector of sea travellers, children, and seemingly living forever in the guise of Father Christmas or Santa Claus. Here too is a small reliquary with relics of St. Nicholas donated by a Monegasque woman devotee in 1777. This serene place has a modern, lively feel. With only 183 stained glass windows, less than many cathedrals in the capital cities of the world, it is worthy of more than a passing glance. Byzantine in style, the cathedral was officially opened in 1903 and finally consecrated in 1911. The main altar is beautiful, made from gilded walnut in around 1667, and the cathedral is full of magnificent art, along with an ornate bishop's throne in white Carrara marble. Panels created in the 1600s by Honor II's wife, believed to be in the style of the Genoese school, many white marble busts and an impressive organ lead you inevitably to the north aisle and the graves of Prince Rainier III and Princess Grace, surrounded by first-class apse mosaic. The lower vault is adorned with 3 statues from a later period, arriving probably during the restoration of 1884. Many Pieta, depictions of the grieving Mary and her dead son Jesus Christ, can be found throughout the cathedral, and there's a plethora of artwork to discover. Having hosted the royal wedding of Prince Rainier to Grace Kelly in 1956, the current Prince Albert had hoped to stage his wedding outside the cathedral in order to accommodate more guests. But it was decided instead that the Archbishop of Monaco would perform this latest of Monte Carlo royal weddings in the main courtyard of the palace instead. Moving back outside to take a final look, tribute must be paid to the sculptor Henri-Louis Cordier from Nice, who worked on the cathedral's facade for 18 years from 1883. He created 6 statues, including Devotee, Nicholas and Benoit. And we can also pay tribute to one Monegasque who's recorded as donating a single florin towards the funding raised for the altarpiece in 1497, Charlotte Bocconi. Time now then to move on to the best shark spotting site in Monte Carlo. Another building of white stone masonry, the Oceanographic Museum. This stonework is a bit special to the Monaco region and buildings. Built from the same materials as the cathedral, they are quarried at La Turbie, east of Monte Carlo. Famous in Roman times for the huge monument that Augustus made to celebrate his victory over the resident Ligurian tribes, it is still the source of white limestone for the region, and about 100,000 tons of it was used to build this 85-metre high building over a period of 11 years. The building was inaugurated in 1901 by passionate modernist reformer Prince Albert I, who wanted to take advantage of the location to provide a truly rich marine aquarium and make an almost palace-like building to house the maritime treasures. For ocean-inspired visitors, there's a lot to see here above water level, including donations from perhaps our most famous of undersea explorers, Jacques Cousteau, who was the director of the museum for many years from 1957. From model ships to mighty sea animal skeletons, tools, weaponry, and the equipment designed by early underwater genius pioneers, This is a refreshing museum for anyone with a passion for the saltwater world. Regular changes of exhibitions, as well as a strong ethic to merge science and art, means there's a constantly changing range of artists and exhibitors all year round. Underneath the museum is 6,500 metres square of aquarium, where you can view over 6,000 specimens of aquatic splendour, and it is a great place to enjoy these spectacular views, all in the comfort of an air-conditioned building and not a snorkel to be seen. With one shark willing to oblige, but a turtle who steadfastly turned his back each time I brought the camera to bear, it is the myriads of smaller fish that really catch the eye. Each member of the reef colony goes about their busy lives without a care in the world and happily ignorant of the viewing public. There are a few lone wolves. This moray, an unpredictable eel to say the least, is safely viewed from just a few centimetres away. With many tanks and the major reef aquarium that you can see into from both sides, this venue is well worth a visit, and with thoughts of ice cream, cold drinks, and perhaps the feel of salt water and sun on our skins, it's time to say goodbye to the fish, head to the surface, and suitably attired, of course, make our way for a break and a bathe on Monte Carlo's famous Larvotto Beach. This stretch of seashore has changed little in the last 30 years, primarily because it's man-made from the extracted stones of local tunnel building. Combined with the Mediterranean Sea's reluctance to have a tidal system of any significance, this beach changes little, and with a small army of overseers to keep it in pristine condition and police it effectively, it is a popular place to get down and clean in saltwater Monte Carlo. It's also popular for another reason. It's free. Unlike the road that runs behind the beach, Princess Avenue Grace, which the Wall Street Journal reported in the early 21st century as being the most expensive street in the world to live on, which might account for the cost of hiring a lounger and a parasol for a couple of hours being the equivalent purchase price of a few hectares of land elsewhere in the world. Nevertheless, this is a beach where jewellery is worn more than bikinis, where children can safely paddle rather than build sandcastles, and where those who pose can display their plumage in the hope of an admiring glance from whoever they want to appeal to. It is only at this time of year that the horizon is interrupted by the flotilla of boats gathering for the annual yacht show. Otherwise, there is nothing but blue med and blue horizon as you gaze out to sea and take in the fresh African-driven Mediterranean air. Behind you, and pragmatically climbing the hillsides to the left and right, Monte Carlo spreads mathematically before your eyes, and it is but a few hundred centimetres until you are into the beaches and accommodation of the richly bathed, who can part with the admission and membership fees without remortgaging their houses. This is Monte Carlo Beach Club. The car is a Bugatti Veyron, about $2 million worth of brushed aluminium. The model posing with this very rare car is a top lady from faraway South America. The jewellery and furs are real. She arrived in a Bentley. There's little room to store a lipstick and eyeshadow in a Bugatti, of course. Inside the Monte Carlo Beach Club is every seaside requirement a dollar would wish for. Hot and cold running waiters, your own jellyfish-proof piece of salt water, and of course, room to stretch out and admire or be admired. One of the best viewpoints around Monaco is outside the entrance road to the Vista Palace Hotel, high up on the east. From here, you can see all of Monaco in her capitalist glory, but it's also a great bird's eye view down onto the beach club. There's a single villa here as part of the complex. I'm advised that it's rented out on an annual basis for the last 6 or 7 years to a Russian businessman at a cost of about $2 million for the summer primetime months. I suspect for that money he gets a lounger and a parasol thrown in free of charge, but I wouldn't count on it. The rest of the beaches along the seafront are private. You are welcome to venture to them, hire jet skis and all that other stuff. But in truth, the Larvotto beach is the best compromise if you aren't willing to part with admission for the private beaches and clubs. We are, at the end of the day, all equal in water when out of our depth and doggy paddling to shore. It's been a busy day here in this small but great city. Time to dim the lights, settle down in cabin, tent, house or hotel, and let the sun set over a warm sea, waking refreshed and ready to see the most affluent and prestigious yacht show on the planet. Tonight, the big boats slap sleepily and all is quiet in the harbour. Tomorrow is another day. With the creaks and groans of seamen's bones and not a ratline rattling in the non-existent wind today, this piece of road and harbour is transformed in September every year to cater for the world's most upmarket boat show. Long gone are the roar and echoes of Formula One racing cars. The famous tunnel on the track becomes just a tunnel again, and the harbour side is actually closed to the public for a while in order to accommodate the visiting spectators and owners. And boy, is there a lot to spectate. We'll pick just a couple of these splendid vessels to explore for a little while, as we are here to see all that this capital has to offer. And despite the billions of pounds floating here, this is just one aspect of Monte Carlo. But these beauties of the sea really do turn your head, and they are impossible to treat with nonchalance. But what turns your head more? Hedonistic horsepower, or the style and shape of those ships designed to capture the wind? Regularly moored at Monte Carlo, and almost a local landmark, is Lady Maura. Privately owned and not for sale, she is an extraordinary craft with her gold plate dressage and ship-shaped bridge. You begin to understand the difference between the boats that are for sale and those that are just there to show, as those that are not for sale rarely have skippers or crew willing to tell you the bottom line in terms of dollars, pounds or euros. Lady Maura was the first ship of her kind to be designed to hide away all tenders and sundries in order to create a sleeker exterior and layout. Size similar to a small cruise liner, demand is growing for more and more of these largest of private boats, and Lady Maura sets a benchmark still, despite being in her early 20s. She really is a pretty boat. The helicopter that is sometimes parked on her rear end looks almost toy-sized in relation. Close by is another pristine piece of white waterware. Vessels like this demand the highest standards of attention and care, and it's not unusual to find that several members of the same family captain and crew them. This Sunrise, built in Georgetown, is a clear example. The ship is captained by a highly experienced mariner, combined with a character who must carry all responsibilities for the diplomatic and ambassadorial aspects of representing the private owners in a public place. His son also crews the boat, and indeed his wife must be an extremely skilled cuisine artist, as she's the cook. Little room for a helicopter here. The hot tub has pride of place. Within hailing distance is a yacht that is revered by all who yearn for acres of white sail canvas. This is the Athena. 90 metres of streamlined sublimity, she is, I believe, the largest privately owned yacht in the world. Currently discounted to a most reasonable £90 million. Although why anyone would want to sell her, having climbed this high up the boating prestige ladder, is surprising. Perhaps the owner is afraid of heights. Here comes the latest offering in the super yacht class. Looking more like an out-of-place alien visitor ship, she is nevertheless someone's pride and joy. The satisfaction factor possibly increased by owning the unusual, albeit not classical, feather pattern of traditional shipping. However ergonomically these craft may be in their decor and design, I still think that the carbon footprint created is not easily washed away with a swabby's brush. There are literally hundreds of boats here. 75 more are anchored offshore, and still they gather with a few days to go before opening day. It is the must-be place to go when you are the owner of a large capstan, and indeed a must-be-seen by any tourist interested in yachts. If you want to watch Formula One in a unique street circuit, come in May. If you want to see Formula One boats, then come in September. There are only two ways to amass the monies needed to charter or indeed own one of these, and this year's festival was noticeable for how many ships were actually owned by individuals now, rather than just banks and corporations. You either earn the loot, or you head to the once only chance saloon you have locally to win the monies. Time to change our deck shoes and head off to our next stop on this exploration of Monaco, the historically and world-famous Casino Monte Carlo. Ask anyone where they think of when they hear the word casino. It's good odds that most people will say Monte Carlo as opposed to Vegas. The casino here is legendary. Images of James Bond, cigarette lighters, cufflinks and fancy frocks, fast cars, fast boats and fast hotel room bookings are all part of its history. The Man Who Broke the Bank at Monte Carlo, a song in the 1890s, a movie by the same name in the 1930s, a book in 1983, and even a musical farce staged in 1988 off-Broadway. All these aspects lend a certain kind of romance to dreams of winning wealth. Nobody walks into this building without wondering if this could be their lucky day. A tourist with €5 who is unsure of which slot machine may pay out with the smallest investment. A studious and serious player who calculates the differences in statistics between roulette and blackjack. The high roller who heads quietly to the private rooms of the inner sanctum. And then someone pulls up outside in a really posh car, parks across all the precious few spaces, and you know that even the high roller is merely rolling around the lowlands. Before we step onto hallowed ground, however, let's enjoy the other aspects of this location. To the west, and seemingly the rear of the casino building, is the Opera House. Built in 1869, it was immediately popular because of its acoustic capabilities, and composers such as Bizet, Franck and Massenet debut works here. These days, its popularity comes from a fusion of performance repertoire, classical and more modern usurpers. This is a glorious piece of architecture, probably better viewed from across the harbour on the road to the Palais, or from the quayside. Also, to the west of the square is the Hotel de Paris, about as fabulous an aspect as you could want for a classic hotel. The inner sanctums here include a vast lobby with a statue of Louis XIV astride his horse, the Garnier and Churchill suites, and for those interested in the bottled grape, there is an extraordinary wine cellar to drool over. Literally hundreds of thousands of the finest examples known lie on over a kilometre of racking, all housed in about 1,500 square metres, hollowed out of the natural rock foundation that supports this top 500 in the world hotel. Across the square to the east, with its ornate sculptures, well-tended grass and flower beds, is the Café de Paris. It first sold a coffee as the Café Divan in the early days of Monte Carlo, and has always been known as the place to meet, people watch, car spot, eat, drink and make merry in Monaco. Its interior is Art Nouveau in style, light and airy, offering the familiar sounds of popping champagne corks and the crack of freshly starched linen as yet another table is dressed. Or you can sit outside under the chalet-style awning and watch the humble and not so humble players that enter the temple of gambling just a few steps away. Opulent is not an adequate word to describe the interior of Casino Monte Carlo. Ornate plasterwork, gold leaf, frescoes and artwork abound. A marble-floored atrium surrounded by 28 onyx columns leaves you in no doubt that at the end of the day, more monies come in the front door than ever really go out. You don't have to be interested in playing and gambling to visit here. All visitors are welcome guests, but it's hard to resist a small flutter, and there is a good compromise between historic games such as blackjack, roulette and dice, and the modern impatient designs of the digital one-armed bandit. For those who wish to venture into the land of serious gambling, either drawn by hope or they can afford such entertainment with no need to mortgage the cat, the inner sanctum is where the high rollers play. It is astounding how much wealth is speculated here on almost a daily basis, as luck ebbs and flows, just like the tidal effect on the peacock bobbing boats, all lined up and as silent as the orchestra in the pit next door in the Opera House. Ready for the celebratory overture to begin, or sometimes just a sad finale. Outside again, we can take one last look at this epicenter of fortune and misfortune, and now it is time to seek a quieter space, a respite from all the honking horns, whistles, appreciative oohs and ahs from the gathered spectators, the bustling doormen, gardeners, delivery men, managers, and immaculately liveried car parkers. Take a short ride, or if a little more determined, a 40-minute uphill stroll to the westernmost viewing spot for Monaco, a Jardin Exotique. As you step through the gates of our final location, it is interesting to reflect on how this spot would have looked when it was first envisaged and created as a dry garden on a Moneghetti rock face in 1933. Now home to several thousand exotic cacti and other prickly plant life from all around the world, it is also the whereabouts of that early Ligure-occupied natural underground cave. Therefore, we can understand why this location would have proved a valued option to the inspired developers and keen horticulturists who set up camp here and troweled into the rock face to create small, determined beds of resistance, and the plants bathe well here in the Mediterranean climate. It would be easy to assume that all cacti are green and similar in basics, but this would do an injustice to this resilient and ancient form of plant life. Every month, all year round, different specimens flower, and I felt that my appreciation of plants was enriched here with that understanding. The views are impressive. You would have to roll a dice at the casino to see which spot gave the best views. Maybe here at the Jardin at the beginning of the day, but then to the Hotel Vista at the end for the chance of a setting sun casting a last blast of light over this impressive principality. Time then to leave this warm and vibrant location as it goes about its busy life several hundred feet below this viewing spot. I'm sure that the roar of the crowd at the stadium to the west can be heard from this prickly but peaceful place, as indeed all the sounds of the world's second smallest country bounce and echo along this mountain range. And having walked up the hill, it seems best to head west into France with good memories and pictures of this most unique of great cities, Monte Carlo.